Welcome to Stitches and Stories Studio, where stories begin. Hosted by author Millie Story, this weekly podcast is a cozy corner for writers, readers, dreamers, and creative hearts who believe stories still have the power to connect us, comfort us, and call us forward. Here we talk about writing, publishing, creativity, craft, and the courage it takes to begin, or begin again, one page at a time. Whether you're starting your first draft, finding your way through revision, learning the business of books, or simply looking for encouragement to keep going, you're in the right place. Now, here's your host, Millie Story.
Hello, and welcome back to Stitches and Stories Studio, where stories begin. This week, the side road came with a tiller, a towpath, and enough narrowboat videos to make YouTube look at me and say, "Ma'am, are you still watching?" And the answer was yes. Yes, I was still watching. I started with one innocent little video about canal boats in the United Kingdom. Just one. A harmless little peek at a floating lifestyle. Next thing I knew, I had opinions about locks, mooring spots, water tanks, cassette toilets, bridge holes, and whether I could live quite happily on a narrow boat with a kettle and a stack of books and only some short-lived sailboat experience. YouTube is a wonderful and a terrible thing. It is a library, a classroom, a travel agency, and a raccoon in a trench coat whispering, "Hey, would you like to lose 3 hours and gain a new obsession?" Well, apparently, yes. Yes, I would. But because I am a writer, I could not leave it alone as a simple entertainment. I watched people steering along, narrowboats through canals, working locks by hand, easing through tight turns, waiting on water levels, planning where to moor, and occasionally having to stop because the canal had its own ideas about timing. And somewhere in there, between one lock gate and another, I thought, well, if that's not like writing a novel, I don't know what is. So today's episode is called Learning to Steer the Story. We're talking about rewrites, rabbit holes, creative detours, and what happens when the book you thought you were writing asks you to slow down, adjust course, and steer with a little more care. And let's remember, the narrowboat is not a speedboat. One of the things that fascinates me about canal boats in this pace is that narrowboats is not in a hurry. It's not built for drama, unless you count the drama of realizing you have misjudged a turn and you are now having a deeply personal conversation with some shrubbery. A narrowboat does not roar across the water. It moves steadily, carefully. You learn to look ahead. You learn to respect tight spaces. You learn that the path may look simple on a map, but the work happens one bridge, one bend, one lock, and one decision at a time. Writing's kind of like that too. We want the story to move like a speedboat. We want the words to fly, the chapters to stack up neatly, and the plots to behave. We want the characters to arrive on time with all their emotional baggage properly labeled. And bless our hearts, most books do not come together like that. Some do, and when they do, we should give thanks and maybe avoid making direct eye contact with them in case we scare them off. But many books move more like a narrowboat, slow, steady, a little awkward around the bends, full of small corrections. You steer, you adjust, you wait for the water to rise. You open one gate, close another. Sometimes you have to step off the boat to help the boat move forward. And that's the part that really got to me. Sometimes you have to step out of the story to help the story move forward. The rewrite without the panic button. This has been on my mind because I've been doing some deep reworking on book 2 in my science fiction series Echoes of Eden. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole spoilery attitude here and spill the beans on anything, but I do want to say that there is a little madness being felt in the footnotes and the possibility of a spreadsheet with color coding. But I will say this, sometimes a story needs more than a little polish. Sometimes you look at a draft and you realize the sentences may be standing upright, but the book's not yet walking in the right direction. And that's not an easy moment. If you've ever had to rethink a project, you probably know what I mean. I mean, maybe you were halfway through the manuscript and you were, or maybe, you even almost finished, or you had already told people that a book was coming out soon. Maybe you started a pre-order and then the book folded its arms, leaned up against the door frame of your writing space and said, actually, we need to talk. Nobody wants to hear that from a manuscript. A manuscript should be grateful. It should bring snacks. It should say, thank you for typing me into existence, and now I will cooperate. But stories rarely are that polite. There comes a point when a writer has to ask a braver question. Not, how close am I to being done, but, is this becoming the book it needs to be? And those, as you can see, are very different questions. How close am I to being done is about a calendar. It's about a word count. Is this becoming the book I need it to be? It's about the work. And sometimes the honest answer means changing course. But changing course is not wasting the trip. Here's what I have to say to the writer who's staring at a messy draft, a stalled chapter, or a project that no longer fits the shape that they thought it would have. Changing course does not mean you wasted the trip. The draft taught you something. The wrong turn showed you that the story is not what you thought it was. The scenes no longer belong, but they may still have taught you your voice, maybe some pacing and backstory, something about the setting, or what your character would have done. Sorry, guys, can you hear a Flash playing with one of his toys? So your story may no longer belong, or what you may have thought. Oh my gosh, I've messed this all up. Let me start over. So the draft taught you something. The wrong turn showed you what the story is not. The scenes that no longer belong may still have taught you something about your voice, pacing, backstory, or even a setting, or what your character would do when they were left unsupervised with bad ideas. Kind of like what Flash is doing now. No longer is everything, no writing is ever entirely wasted. Some of it becomes the book, some of it becomes compost. But if you're a gardener, you already know that compost is not a failure. Compost brings you tomatoes. So a discarded chapter may become a better scene later. A side character could have their own book. A line of dialogue may survive 3 rewrites like a cockroach in a tuxedo. Even the pages you cut can teach you that the book was trying to become something before you were ready to hear it. And that's part of the work, really. And revision is not a punishment. It's not suggesting that you failed the first time. Sometimes revision is just navigation. And you need to learn to turn the boat. You need to learn how to steer. And you need to steer the story the way you want it to go. The locks and the gates of revision. One of the things I kept watching in the narrowboat videos was the lock process. A boat reaches a lock and the boater cannot simply keep going. There are gates, there are paddles. The water must rise or fall. And progress depends on a sequence of small physical actions. Open this, close that, wait. Check the rope, watch the current. Mind the boat, do the next thing. And this is a beautiful picture of revision. When the draft reaches a lock, you cannot always push harder. You may need to change the water level. In story terms, that might mean raising the stakes, lowering the noise, reworking the opening, moving a revelation around, cutting a subplot, even strengthening a motivation. Letting a character make a decision you were trying to avoid because it causes trouble 3 chapters later. And that trouble 3 chapters later is exactly the kind of trouble fiction likes. Fiction's not here for everybody to have a sensible afternoon with a sandwich. Sometimes the story gets stuck because we're trying to steer it down a canal that's too narrow for what it has become. Sometimes the scenes refuse to move because the character is facing the wrong problem. Sometimes the book has outgrown the plan, and that I know can be frustrating. But it's also a sign of life in your story. Your characters are taking your story someplace you hadn't imagined. And dead stories don't argue with you, but living stories do. 3 questions when the story changes course. When the story starts asking for new direction, I think there are 3 helpful questions to ask. First, what am I trying to force? This is not always a comfortable question. Sometimes we are forcing an old outline because we already made it. Sometimes we're forcing a character into a role because it's convenient. Sometimes we're forcing the plot twist because we liked the idea 6 months ago, and even though the story has now quietly packed its bags and moved out, we're still trying to make it work. The second question is, what is the story asking for instead? And this one requires us to listen. And the answer might come from a character who needs more agency, conflict that needs sharper consequences, or a theme that has been whispering beneath the surface while we were busy polishing commas. The third question is, what from the old draft is still worth carrying forward? This is important because a rewrite does not mean throwing everything into the sea while yelling, "Farewell, poor choices." There are many scenes worth saving. There are maybe emotional beats that still belong. There may be character moments or world building details, dialogue, or entire chapters that just simply need a new place to live, and you need to shift them around and reorder things a little bit. A rewrite is not always a bonfire. Sometimes it's just salvage. And if there are pieces that you cut, side note, save them. Save them in a little junk folder because later on, you can use those as reader magnets or bonus content for readers or people who subscribe to your newsletter. And you can say, here's the scenes that got cut. It's kind of like a blooper reel for your book. And those can be very valuable. Rabbit holes are not always distractions. Let me just say in my own defense. Now, let's talk about the rabbit hole part of this because I know I'm not the only writer who has lost an evening to YouTube for research or documentaries, old interviews, maps, historical oddities, or one very specific article about Victorian mourning jewelry that somehow became a necessary paragraph that I ended up cutting later. So, rabbit holes can be dangerous, sure. They can absolutely steal your writing time. And I've gone looking for one fact and came back with 45 minutes of knowing how to restore a cast iron stove, which is impressive since I don't own one and no one has asked me anything about it. But the creative rabbit holes are not always wasteful. Sometimes they refill the well. Sometimes they give us some use of a metaphor. Sometimes they show us a rhyme, a setting, a problem, maybe a certain lifestyle, or kind of patience we didn't know we needed. Watching these narrowboat videos, I did not write my chapter, and it certainly didn't write it for me. Sadly, no boat captain on YouTube has offered that service, but it did give me a new way to think about revision. It gave me an image of slow work of steering the story, that sometimes a good image can unlock a thought we have because we were trying to force the rest of the thoughts with a crowbar. So yes, set some boundaries. Do not let the research turn into a vacation home where where your draft never sees you again. But also pay attention to what catches your curiosity. Writers are magpies. We collect shiny things because later one of those shiny things may be the key to a scene. And a word to the writer in the middle of a rewrite. If you're in the middle of a rewrite, or if a suspect, or if you suspect one is coming, I want to encourage you to take a breath. You're not behind because the book asked for more time. You're not foolish because the first version didn't become the final version. You're not starting over from nothing, even though it may feel that way sometimes. You are starting over with new knowledge, new wisdom, new experience, and that can mean the world of difference. You know the characters better now. You know your own world better, and you know which scenes were alive and which ones were only wearing little hats and pretending. And you know where the energy got lost. You know which questions kept tugging at you. That knowledge counts for something. The first draft is not always the road. The first draft is a survey. Sometimes it tells us the hills, the water, and the places the bridge washed out, and the spot where we're going to need better boats. The revision comes along and says, all right, now let's build a road we actually belong on. So I hope some of that resonates with you and that it helps a little bit. Uh, and if you want to check out some cool YouTube videos, I'm watching Cruising the Cut, Betty on the Boat, and May. Those are my three faves right now. Some other things that I'm obsessed with this week is my reading. So my reading life has taken some interesting turns. So I'm still reading this Steve Berry books. As you know, I love Steve Berry. I love the way his books remind me how much momentum can come from history, secrets, documents, and clues, which plays right into my Aaron Cade character and the sense that the past is not finished with us yet. At the same time, I've been snapping up Warren Adler books from the library, and he's probably best known for War of the Roses. But he wrote many, many other books, and I'm looking into diving more into his books. Um, I haven't started them yet, but I've got two or three that are in my TBR. So, what I like about having these two reading paths side by side is that they pull on different storytelling muscles. So, Steve Berry gives big external motion, secrets, history, danger, the kind of plot energy that makes you feel like someone should be running through a museum while carrying a document and some very bad ideas. Warren Adler, at least from what I've read so far, reviews, uh, reminds us that human conflict can be its own explosion. A marriage or relationship, a grudge with long simmering resentment, those things can carry as much force as a car chase when the writing is sharp. And that's useful for writers to notice. Sometimes when a story is not working, the answer isn't more plot. The answer is more pressure, better pressure. And where's that pressure coming from? Is it coming from outside or from within? And good stories need some of both, something happening in the world and something happening inside the person who has to face what's happening in the world. So that brings me to a little practical exercise for you this week. Uh, Take a scene or a chapter or even a project that feels stuck to you and write 3 sentences at the top of the page. The first sentence is, I may be forcing this part of the story by trying to blank. The second sentence, the story may be asking for blank. And the third sentence, what part is worth carrying forward? Blank. So don't overthink it. Give yourself like 10 minutes and write an honest answer, even if it's inconvenient, and maybe even especially if it's inconvenient. Inconvenient answers are often the one that the story has been hiding. That's kind of like tucking the good silver away. So once you have those answers, try writing a new version of that scene or that chapter with those adjustments. Now, not the whole book. Don't take the next 6 months of your life. Just do a scene or a short paragraph. Just one lock, one gate, one careful turn. So if your story changes course this week, take heart. You may not be lost. You may simply be entering a lock, and the gates are awkward and the water is shifting, and it may take longer than you planned, but that's okay. Slow does not mean stalled. Careful does not mean cowardly. And revision does not mean failure. Sometimes the slow, careful passage is exactly what gets the story to the next stretch of the open water. And if you happen to fall in that rabbit hole along the way, maybe come back with something new, something useful, a metaphor, a setting, a strange fact, or a spark. If nothing else, a new appreciation for people who can steer a narrowboat through a lock without bumping into England. That's all I have for this episode. Thank you so much for spending part of your time with me this week. And don't forget, writing is what happens when curiosity has a keyboard. Talk to you next time.
Thank you for joining us this week at Stitches and Stories Studio. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more conversations about writing, creativity, publishing, and the storytelling life in the backlist, available wherever you're listening today. You can also support the podcast by subscribing on Substack or by visiting Buy Me a Coffee. To explore Millie's books and short stories, visit stitchesandstories.com. You can also find her on Facebook, Instagram, and X as Melissa L. Story. For questions, comments, or podcast sponsorship opportunities, please reach out by email at millie@stitchesandstories.com. Thanks again for listening to Stitches and Stories Studio, where stories begin.